You are about to listen to another episode of That Sports Guys podcast, hosted by Craig Forrestall. Find Craig on Twitter at that_sports_guy. The That Sports Guys podcast is proudly featured by NFL Draft Diamonds, your draft coverage king. So sit back, relax, and enjoy some football talk.
Hello and welcome to another episode of That Sports Guys podcast. I am Craig Forrestall. You might know me from Twitter as at that_sports_guy. And with us today is our first ever non-player repeat guest, Ryan Roberts, Rise and Draft on Twitter. He's an NFL Draft Analyst for NFL Draft Bible, which is the official draft coverage provider for Sports Illustrated, which we will get into. But first things first, Ryan, my guy, what's going on with you, man? It's been a minute.
I know it's been a little bit. I appreciate that, Craig, and I feel honored, man, to be the first double repeat non player. That's awesome, man. Appreciate that.
Yeah, you, Teron Jackson, and Spencer Brown. That's the list. It's a good list.
Yeah. It's a good list.
It definitely is a good list. And a couple of things that we were talking about beforehand was the transition into fatherhood. So I wanted to say congratulations to you on that, Ryan. I know we were talking a little bit about our kids before we got on here, but that's always a great thing to take on. And if you thought you were sleepless during draft coverage, and oh man, right now you're learning a new thing about being sleepless. But I talked about the transition to Sports Illustrated. Ryan, how was it that you found out that was in the works, and ultimately when you got word it was happening? Just take us through that whole, sequence of events.
So I think it dated back, just to my recollection. First time I heard about it was in the summer, actually. It was a long time ago at this point. And Rick Saratella, who's the owner of Draft Bible, had come to me and just said, like, hey, we might be doing something with Sports Illustrated where we might have some published articles, but it wasn't to this level, right? To this insane kind of content piece that we're putting out there now. And then it kind of got pushed to the side a little bit, right? Like we got to a point where we were like, oh, wow, this is probably going to happen. Like we're going to become the main content provider for the NFL draft. And then it was something where it just got hit a lull and we hadn't heard. And then we were kind of like, I maybe need to explore different options. Maybe Sports Illustrated isn't in the cards. And then it was like a week before the Senior Bowl, right? Actually a couple weeks, I guess, probably the end of December, we got the word that like, hey, this is happening. This is going to happen quick. And it was like in a couple week span that we had actually had conversations with, at the time was the Dynasty Draft Room with Zach Patron, all those guys. And Rick, it was like, hey, let's partner with them. Let's bring them aboard. And then let's hit this Sports Illustrated thing with ground running. So we went from like having a couple content producers, including myself, to, hey, now we have a staff of about 40 or 50 guys that are ready in both the scouting department and the fantasy football world to really start, hitting the ground running and trying to put out as much content as possible. And it's honestly been a thing that's been on the mantle for a little bit, something that we've been talking about. But when the process really began, it was like rapid fire. Like things happened so quick, so fast. And, we got kind of pushed right into the middle of draft season for our first year of coverage, which is a little bit of a, adjustment period to say the least. But it's just been such a dramatic rise and so quick. I can't even like emphasize it enough. Like, even though we had known that this was a possibility for a while, it was like the minute that it happened, it was just like things were coming at so many different angles so quickly. And it was just a really big adjustment period for us.
And now we've talked about the transition. So now we wouldn't be doing our job if we didn't talk draft. I got a little word association for you. I'll go ahead. I'll name you a player, and then you give me the first thing that comes to mind when you hear the name. You ready?
Mm-hmm.
All right. First one for you. Jalen Darden, wide receiver, North Texas.
Explosiveness. Do you want me to explain it or just keep it there? One word.
However you want to do this, Ryan. You're the captain of this ship.
Okay. Explosiveness. I mean, honestly, Coverage USA kids, for the most part, that he's going against, just couldn't cover Jalen Darden this past year.
And now, draft Twitter always likes height, weight, speed, comparisons. Hollywood Brown for draft Twitter. Would that be a height, weight, speed combo possibly?
I don't know. I don't know if he's quite as fast as Hollywood. Because Hollywood, I mean, Hollywood's blazing. I think Darden's definitely got speed. He reminds me a little bit of the kid that just got drafted by the Bears last year.
Darnell Mooney.
Darnell Mooney from Tulane. Yeah, that's kind of more
Mm.
who he reminds me of. Yeah.
Now let's go to the offensive line. Stanford. I know that you like Davis Mills, but let's talk about that offensive line with Walker Little.
He's an enigma. That would be the word that comes to mind. I mean, he looks the part. He's got some good tape, but then other tape that is very uneven. He hasn't played in like 2 years now. Like, it's just, what are you getting with Walker Little is the biggest question mark, man. So he's the ultimate enigma. Either he's going to be a starting caliber offensive lineman, or he's going to be a guy that we completely forget about in a couple years.
Now, a name that everyone knows at this point, Quinn Meinerz from Division III Wisconsin Whitewater.
Got to be Belly, right? After his performance up there in Mobile, right? Like, I mean, Quinn had a great week, right? Like, I mean, everybody knows at this point, like, he is now in the conversation of top center potentially in the draft, one of the top interior offensive linemen in what's a very good class. But, you know, the image that's going to be lasting is the belly out, the half shirt. It was great stuff just to see what he did down in Mobile.
Jaret Patterson, running back, Buffalo. Their pro day is actually going on right now, and listed at 5'9" on the website, came in at 5'6" and some change. The 195 was accurate. So, Ryan, take it away. Jaret Patterson.
I'm going to cheat a little bit. The person that I can't get out of my mind, here's a comp, Ray Rice. Like, he just reminds me so much of Ray Rice. I'm not saying he's going to be quite as successful as him, but just that body type, the skill set a little bit. And like you said, I mean, 5'6.5", he weighed in at only 200 pounds. Ray Rice was a really thick guy. I think he was only 5'7" and some change. So similar body types, similar play styles. Don't know if he'll be able to replicate the success that Ray Rice had at the next level, but I think stylistically there's some similarities there.
Now, this is a guy that I'm high on, and I know not everyone is as high on him as I am. I know the NFL likes him quite a bit too. Damar Hamlin, defensive back, Pittsburgh.
Versatility would be something that pops in my head first. I know a lot of people really like Paris Ford, and then, you know, unfortunately he had the pro day that he had, which was not pretty. I mean, Damar came in as a really talented, high recruit cornerback, and obviously made the transition eventually to safety. For me, he's a guy that, hey, whether he's on the roof, he's down near the box, he's in the slot, there's going to be multiple ways to use him. I don't know if I think he's kind of like he's got the toolbox, right? Like, he's got a lot of different things that he could do, but I don't think he's a master of anything. I think he's just solid across the board, but versatility and consistency is something that NFL teams really clamor for. So
now let's stay there on that Pitt defense. Let's move to the defensive line. Jalen Twyman.
Let's go hydrant. He's like a full fire hydrant, man. He weighed in at like 6'1.5" and 300 something pounds. I will say his pro day was not great either. His explosive stuff was pretty good. His bench press was awesome. 40 time was not great. So he's just it looked like he put on a lot of weight for the event, which I think was maybe a little counterproductive to a degree, because when I watched him, I didn't think he was like the most explosive defensive lineman of all time. But I thought he was decent foot quickness. And then I think that he just really packed on the weight to be over 300, quote unquote, right? And then I think that did hurt his testing a little bit.
And now you said something in there that I want to touch on. Given that Jalen Twyman is a D tackle, how much weight does that 40 time for a defensive tackle carry for you?
It's just more the historical context of the whole 40, right? Like, guys that he's similar than, seeing how much of an outlier a guy is, where they land with inside those thresholds type of thing. For me, it's the 10-yard split's way more important, right? Like, I want to see what his first step and just the first couple steps look like for a guy like him. I think that it does hold a little more weight than some defensive tackles, though, just because he's a guy that was a penetration style 3 technique at Pittsburgh, and he was a guy that had production as a pass rusher. So athletic testing is important, just because you need to make sure that that skill set that he has can translate. And if he's not a great athlete, then in theory, how well does it translate, right?
Definitely. And now let's finish it off. A guy that I know that you're a big fan of, Nick Bolton, linebacker, Missouri.
Oh man, stud, dominance. He's just like, there's so many things that come to mind. He's just one of those guys that everybody's going to try to quantitate him by the size, which he's going to be right around 6 foot, maybe 5'11" and some change. He's only going to be 232 pounds. But this is a guy on my podcast last week that we had a category for linebackers that was don't want to meet in a dark alley. And for me, that's Nick Bolton. That hit power, that lower body strength, that ability to convert power in such tight windows. That's the guy that we were talking about coming downhill and knocking somebody out. That's Nick Bolton.
And now everyone loves a quarterback, right? Let's play a little quarterback shuffle. I'm going to go over the 4 names that everyone's talking about near the top of the draft. I'm just going to name them, and then it's up to you to address them in the order that you prefer them. So first on the list is Trevor Lawrence, Clemson, Zach Wilson, BYU, Justin Fields, Ohio State, and then fourth on the list is Trey Lance, North Dakota State. Ryan, take it away.
Yeah, unfortunately, I guess I put this out on Twitter yesterday accidentally without even thinking about it. So Trevor Lawrence is number 1 for me. I mean, honestly, I think that some people get caught in hyperbole sometimes, right? And he's the chosen one. He's the golden boy, all that type of stuff. For me, he is the best quarterback I've ever evaluated, though. I mean, in my opinion, 6'5" plus, athletic, strong arm. We don't want to, obviously, you don't want to talk about the quarterback wins thing, but like there's a reason that the guy's lost like 2 games in the last 5 years of football that he's played, right? And then he's got everything kind of, he's got everything squared away off the field. He's like 21 years old. He's already engaged. You don't hear anything about him from negatively at all. He's a leader. He's an ambassador of that football team. So I think that he just hits all those boxes, right? Like he just checks everything. For me, after that though, because for me, Trevor Lawrence is a guy that I think no matter what situation he's thrown into, he can transcend it. I think that he can make players around him better. I think that he can make the most of a bad situation. The next tier for me are guys that situation is going to matter a lot. It's going to matter. You need to surround these guys with a good culture and with good supporting cast, or else they could get so lack of confidence early on that they might crumble. And I want to call them complete boom or bust, but I think these guys are just not quite transcenders. I think that they could be great quarterbacks in the right situations. So for me, if I'm banking on potential, I'm going to go with the guy that I think has the most potential. And that's Trey Lance. I think from North Dakota State, we're talking about, hey, he only started 16 games or 17 games in his career, whatever it was. It's worrisome because there's just not a lot of players that have been successful with that lack of experience. And then he's a guy that's coming from the FCS level as a redshirt sophomore. Like there's so many things to question about him, but things that you can't question is he's almost 6'4", he's 230 pounds. He's athletic. He probably has the strongest arm in the class, and he comes from a pro-style offense where they asked a lot of him. Checks at the line of scrimmage, going through multiple reads. Ball handling is something that we never talk about. All these guys are just in shotgun, running spread all the time. A guy that can come under center and various handoffs and various play actions, and the ball handling aspect is huge. And for me, Trey Lance is the best right now in that situation because he's the only one that comes from a true pro-style offense. And I don't think that he's as raw as people act like he is, despite the lack of experience. He's been working with Quincy Avery, who's one of the best quarterback coaches in the business. I'm a big fan of Trey Lance. And then for me, it's that next 2 and 3, they're close. Him and Justin Fields, for me, they're close because I think that from an athletic perspective and from an arm strength perspective, they're close. Like they compare well to one another. I just think that Trey Lance has a little more nuance to his game. I think he has a little more touch to his game. I think that there's a little higher upside to his game. So he just slightly over Justin Fields for me. And then I think that then there's a tier break to number 4, which is Zach Wilson. I like Zach Wilson. I was a little tentative on it early. Then I watched the 4 games, from early in the season. And I was like, yeah, I get it. Like he makes a lot of the throws that are selling right now. He can do some great things out of structure, off a platform. There's so much to like about Zach Wilson. The problem is he's a 1-year wonder himself. He started 3 years, 2.5 because he was injured a lot of 2019. But you saw very up and down. Even this year where he had a great season, like against Coastal Carolina and Houston, a couple of the better defenses that he played with, a couple NFL guys on it for each. He wasn't as good as he was the majority of the season besides that. So I'm a little worried about Zach Wilson, but I do think that he has enough talent. I'm definitely good with him being in the top first half of the first round because I do think he is exceptionally talented. For me, he's the ultimate guy though, that he needs to land in the right system and be in a culture that allows him to do the things that he does well early while he continues to hammer out the rest of his game.
And then ultimately, I know we touched on those 4, but how many quarterbacks do you think end up going in the first round? Mac Jones, Kyle Trask. I know that it's a love-hate relationship with Kellen Mond because of what he's done in the SEC only compares to Dak Prescott and Tim Tebow statistically. So I get that. So where are you on the number of quarterbacks in round one?
Number of quarterbacks should be 4 with the guys that we just named. I think it's going to be 5. I think Mac Jones is definitely going to be in there. I don't think Kyle Trask or Mond or any of those guys are going to sneak in. I just have a feeling that's not going to happen. I think 5 is the safe number. And, because I would not personally draft Mac Jones in the first round, but all indication is that that's definitely going to happen.
And now, since we're staying there with the draft, I want to talk to you about a philosophy that I have, and I've heard it from a couple of other people as well. So my belief is that when you get to a certain point in the first round, somewhere around pick 25 or so, then when you get down to about pick in the early to mid 40s, there's really no difference between the player drafted at 25 and in the early portion of the 40s when you talk about overall talent, at least in my opinion.
Yeah.
Ryan, what's your take on that viewpoint? And is that something that could work out for a team this year?
Well, I agree with it. I do agree with it because, I've never given out 25 first-round draft picks. First-round grades, I should say, to begin with. So then we're talking about that next tier. For me, especially this year, this is perfect example. Like, I think I have 19 or 20 true first-round grades, and then I have a stupid amount of early seconds. Like, there's so many. So working from that 25 to 45-ish range, whatever you're talking about, there might be 20 guys that I have similarly, grouped because I think that they have a similar grade on the board. I think that some people won't understand that because they think like, well, there has to be 32 first round worthy players. That's not true in any year, really. I definitely have never graded guys near that for having a 32 first round true grades. So I think that it definitely makes sense, especially in this year. For me, this is not the strongest draft at the top. And then, like I said, there's a plethora of second and third round grades for me. This is a day 2 heavy draft. And I think, honestly, Craig, this year, you might even be able to extend that from 25 to maybe 50-ish. Like, I think that there's not much separation here. And how it plays in hand is guys in the late first round, you're more willing to trade and deal out. Like, oh, let's trade back to 30-something if we're at the 25th pick because we're going to get a guy that's similarly graded on our board and we're going to get extra draft capital. So I think that that's how it really can play into somebody's hands.
And now we talked about it being a strong draft on day 2. What are some of the strongest positions in this draft? And then also, where's the draft week?
I think the strongest, I would say, wide receiver is the easy one, right? We've had back-to-back incredible years at wide receiver. I think this year is maybe more impressive up top, the top 4 guys or so than last year's even though last year's was insane up top. And then I think the depth is equal, maybe better than last year as well. So we've had back-to-back historically deep wide receiver drafts. And then I would say offensive line in general. There's a ton of interior offensive linemen I like in day 2 into day 3. Offensive tackle, I don't think that the top is that great. Like, I think that Penei Sewell is fantastic, one of the top players in this draft. But then I think there's a little bit of a drop off. But I think that, again, late first, second round grades of offensive tackle is stout. Like, there's a lot of guys there. Interior offensive line, like I said, has a lot of depth. Linebacker for me, if I had to pick one defensive group, I think there is a ton of linebackers, man. Like, we're talking about 4 guys that can potentially go in the first round when linebacker has been kind of devalued over the last few years. So I think linebacker's really deep. I think cornerback is probably my biggest surprise this year because I left summer and, you knew about Patrick Surtain and you knew about Caleb Farley a little bit. Like, I'm not as big a Farley guy as some people are, but like, I didn't love the class, to be honest. Like, I was like, oh, I don't know about this cornerback class. And now I'm completely changed on that now because now we got guys like J.C. Horn and Patrick Surtain and Eric Stokes, and then Caleb Farley for me is like number 4 or 5 on the board. So now I'm like, okay, I can deal with that kind of guy being like a late first, second round grade for me when I have that depth up top. So cornerback I think is really strong. And then weakest, it's been highly publicized, but this defensive line class in general is just bad, especially interior defensive line for me. It's weak. I don't love it up top. I like Christian Barmore. After that, there's a bunch of niche players that I don't think are substantial high volume players inside. And then this defensive end, 3-4 outside linebacker group, this edge group for me is one that I've been going back and forth with people so much. I don't think it's that good. I don't think it's a good class. I have to see some people are really high on it. I just don't agree. I think that there's upside. I think that there's some guys that could surprise. I think if Greg Rousseau hits, then he could be a very good player. I think Azeez Ojulari is a good football player. I think that if Jason Oweh from Penn State hits, then he's a very good football player. Kwity Paye, if he hits, is a very good football player. But they're all huge question marks making out the top of the class. For me, I don't think that it's exceptionally strong. And then all the depth that we're talking about is, again, these guys that have traits, but it's not tangible right now. Like I don't know if Jason Oweh, who's probably going to be a first-round pick just because he's such a freak, or early second-round pick, I don't think he's going to play early. Like, I don't think he can play in 2021 with the film that I saw this past year at Penn State. So I think that there's a lot of question marks. But for me, the defensive line class in general, I think is pretty damn weak this year.
And now let's move to some guys in the mid to late rounds that could outplay their draft position early on in their careers or almost immediately.
I would say I don't know if he qualifies, to be honest, but you already mentioned him. Davis Mills for me, like if there's a quarterback I'm taking on day 2 in the mid rounds, like that's my guy, man. Like I think that he's very talented. I think he's more athletic than people think. I think he has a chance. And I guess this is a hot take. It's fine. I'll stick with hot takes. Davis Mills for me, I'd rather have Davis Mills than Mac Jones. I'd rather have him than Kyle Trask. I just would, because I think that the upside is just substantial. And I don't think that I would draft Kyle Trask or Mac Jones to start from day one, even though everyone's convinced that Mac Jones is a day one starter and immediately successful just because he has this high floor. I think that's a little bit of a moniker that is kind of it's just been out there too long, and it's just not true in my opinion. So for me, Davis Mills is a guy. A couple running backs. Jared Dokes for me from Cincinnati. If this kid can stay healthy, I'm telling you, man, he's good. Like, he's very good. He's quick. He's physical. He has great contact balance. He catches the ball better than you would think. It's just he's had injuries, and he, has only been a true number one ball carrier for 1 year because of Michael Warren, declaring it after the 2019 season. So it's a little bit of a question mark, but I think in the late rounds, somebody could get a steal with a guy like Jared Dokes. And Elijah Mitchell is my guy from Louisiana, who I think is, if there's anybody that's going to be James Robinson this year, I think it's Elijah Mitchell. I really do. Because he is, again, 5'11", 220 pounds. Everything about him is just so solid. Like James Robinson last year, there was nothing that stood out about him at Illinois State, right? Like, he wasn't the fastest guy. He's 220 pounds, but he's not like the most physical runner of all time. He's a powerful runner, but he's not like, wow, he's running over everybody type of thing. He's not a dynamic in the passing game, but what he did was he was just so solid across the board. I think Elijah Mitchell's the same thing. Got a wide receiver, and I'm sorry, I'm going to throw out a lot of people here because
not a problem. Loving it. Keep going.
Yeah. So Amir Smith-Marset from Iowa, who's a New Jersey guy, North Jersey guy. I think he's really good. Really good. People don't talk about him too much because I know he's had a little bit of off the field stuff. He's had some injuries, all that type of stuff. But in an Iowa offense that has been lackluster passing the ball over the last couple of years, this kid, I think, is a legit 4.3, 4.4 speed guy who he can not only win in the vertical third, I think he could win in end arounds. He's returned kicks for touchdowns. He can do punt return duties. I think he is a space player that's going to be a lot better NFL player than college football player. I really do think Amir Smith-Marset's going to be a guy on day 3 where you're going to be like, how did he last to day 3? Like, how is he there? Zach Davidson, who I've been a big fan of since the summer, Central Missouri tight end, who unfortunately did not get a chance to play this season because of the D2 season getting pushed. I don't even know if they're playing in the spring, to be honest. So he was a guy that had to make a decision. He went down to the College Gridiron Showcase, weighed in at 6'6.5", 250 pounds, right around 248. He's an athletic kid who has a really bizarre story. He was actually only supposed to be a punter originally at Central Missouri, and he just kept developing. And they were like, okay, you can move a little bit, and you're 6'6.5". And he developed into an All-American tight end with right around 900 yards on 40 catches and 15 touchdowns his final year. For me, this guy is that matchup dude. Like, think Mike Gesicki, put him in the slot, and in the matchups that he can create against linebackers and some slower safeties down near the line of scrimmage, I think he has some seam busting potential. I think there's upside there. And then he's a 3-time all-conference punter as well. So, like, I don't know how much value that adds to you, but it's a nice little side note, if nothing else. And then on defense, I have 3 guys I just want to list real quick. Malcolm Kuntz from Buffalo. For me, I don't understand where there's no buzz. He's been productive over the last couple of years. He had a nice pro day today, had really long arms. I understand that he's not the most powerful guy of all time right now. He's more of a outside track speed rusher, but I mean, the guy just wins. I mean, against anybody he plays, he just wins. So for me, I think that there is a relatively high upside as far as at least a rotational piece on the defensive line for him. Nahshon Wright is a cornerback that I want to write down from Oregon State. He was 2-year player at Oregon State. He transferred over from Laney Junior College, which was featured in Last Chance U. His brother, Rajon, was on the team, who's at Oregon State now. Nahshon's got great ball skills. He's listed at 6'4". He's probably more around 6'3", but he's got insane length for a team like a Seattle or a Dallas Cowboys now or a New York Jets, the teams that love to run cover 3 heavy schemes. I think Nahshon Wright's got everything that you look for. He's a track guy in high school, so he's got vertical speed to go along with his 6'3" frame. I think there's ball skills and potential there. And the last guy was a guy that I just watched maybe 3 weeks ago. He was a Senior Bowl guy that I didn't know much about. Darren Hall from San Diego State. Tariq Thompson gets a lot of talk in that secondary, who's a solid football player himself. Darren Hall played boundary corner for them in a heavy cover 2 scheme. And when we're talking about zone instincts, this guy has great eyes. He is physical. He comes down very fast, collapses on underneath routes, good change of direction, good click and close. I think that he's more a nickel or maybe even a safety than he is a true outside corner. I think some cover 2 heavy schemes will like him at corner. But for me, I think he's got a little versatility to him. And we're talking guys that are going to stick their nose in there and be physical and play short zones and create a lot of catch points because he's just so quick and aggressive to the ball. I really like Darren Hall. I think that he's going to be a guy that maybe won't ever be a star at the next level. But when you look at it, you're going to say, he can back up both safety spots and nickel and maybe play a little outside corner in a pinch. And for that, when we're talking about roster development, like that guy gives you flexibility on a roster. So those are just a few guys. That was a long-winded response to a shorter question, but those are a few guys I really like in the later stages of the draft.
And now you touched on it. You mentioned some speed in a couple of those answers, and you hit the magic number, the 4 threes. Now, that brings us to the pro day workouts that are going on. Seems like there's a lot of guys running 4 threes this year, and some people have questioned the validity of some of these workouts. Just what's your take on the whole pro day workouts only and no true combine workout setting?
I think it's overblown, to be honest. It's honestly a little annoying at points on Twitter, because everyone's just like, everyone's a 4-3 guy. For me, testing is just a verification process. Like if I thought a guy was fast on film and then he runs fast at the combine or the pro day, check. I was right. I don't need to add anything to my scouting report. Like that, I was good. That guy is fast. He plays fast. I'm good to go. If a guy now, I think he's like a 4-3 guy on film, and then he goes out there and runs 4.55. Like then that's like whoa, maybe you need to go back and check the film. So that's where that verification comes from again. If you are, for me, bumping up grades just because a guy runs a 4.3, even though you didn't see 4.3 on the film, that's like you're diluting your process. Why are we doing that? I never understood that bump for the athletic testing. It should literally be just verification for what your eyes see. That should be what your report is for me. So I don't understand. I've never understood that. So for me, it's like, okay, if you want to look at these times and, add 5/10 of a second to it, like that's fine. Do that. Whatever. It doesn't matter. I mean, at the end of the 5/100th of a second, I'm sorry. If you want to do that, that's fine. Throw it on there. Oh, a guy ran a 4.48 at Exos. He's really only a 4.54 guy. That's fine. It shouldn't matter. At the end of the day, your process is what matters. That whole verification should not be a big indicator of what you believe in a player. Like if you like Jonathan Adams from Arkansas State, whether he ran a 4.48 or a 4.59, that shouldn't really matter because you should have wrote down in your notes, like, I think he's a 4.55 guy because that's what I did. So he ran 4.48. I'm like, okay, it's a little fast. The clock was a little fast. For me, I went back and I'm like, no, I'm comfortable where I am. So use it as a verification process. Don't get so huffy and puffy about it. It is what it is. At the end of the day, the tape is what matters.
And now I just want to get your thoughts on this because there seems to be a split mindset. And I know that you live down there in Eagles country. Jalen Hurts.
Yep.
Is this the Jalen Hurts show or the Eagles in the quarterback market early on this year?
So, I mean, I've talked with so many people about this just because, like you said, I am an Eagles country. I'm not an Eagles fan, though, so I have an unbiased opinion towards this, right? I think the Eagles are drafting a quarterback with the first pick. I think they might be trading up to draft the quarterback with the first pick. Because when I look at everything that happened this offseason with the Eagles, nothing says that they are sold on Jalen Hurts. They have a new coaching staff coming in. To start it out, Carson Wentz is your guy, right? And then, the benching happens last 4 games of the season. So then you're like, oh, that's not good. But then all accounts are Doug Peterson and Carson Wentz bump heads. Okay, they got rid of Doug Peterson. Let's bring in Frank Reich's boy. Let's bring in Nick Sirianni here to quote unquote, and this term was used to fix Carson Wentz. So the 2 biggest moves you did this offseason were to save Carson Wentz. Nothing about Jalen Hurts. Unfortunately for them, they miscalculated. And then after that signing happens, Carson Wentz is still like, nah, I'm good. I'd rather have a fresh start. I want out of here. So then that happens. And then you're getting sold this, they believe in Jalen Hurts. They believe in him. When did that start? When Carson Wentz left? You're telling me right now that you have a top 10 pick. You could probably get up even higher to maybe get a quarterback that you really want. And you're telling me that a guy that you didn't believe in a month ago, that was only a 2nd round pick, is your guy. Like, that's going to stop you from drafting a quarterback in the top 10. I'm not buying it. I'm just not. And I think that all indications say that they're not sold on Jalen Hurts. They were trying their best to make it work with Carson Wentz. And I don't think anything changed in a month that they were like, wow, yeah, no, we miscalculated here too. Like, Jalen Hurts is good. He's our guy. And I don't think that a former 2nd round pick, although it was a bad pick at the time, said it at the time too, because not only did it fracture the rest of your quarterback's confidence, but then you drafted a player in the 2nd round who might be your guy, might not be, when guys like Jeremy Chin were on the board who could really help your football team right now. But instead you drafted a backup quarterback who now you're telling me the number 57th overall pick, I think he was last year, 54th, whatever it was. You're telling me that guy is going to stop you from drafting a really talented quarterback in the top 10 potentially? No chance. Don't buy it at all.
So now just hearing all that with the Eagles and the Colts connection right now, and how Wentz is back with Frank Reich, and they brought in a Frank Reich disciple out to Philadelphia. Trey Lance? Would Trey Lance be the guy? Would he? I mean, does that make logical sense, or am I just reading too far into it?
I have been on board with this take for a long time. I think Trey Lance makes the most sense. I think stylistically, he makes the most sense for what Nick Sirianni and what Frank Reich like to do. Heavy play action. They really like the run game. Well, I've said it already. The only guy that has ton of experience in a true pro style offense is Trey Lance, under center, doing all those types of things. I think Trey Lance fits the best, and I know Eagles fans are going to hate it because they're going to say, oh, no, another North Dakota State guy. But trust me when I say, if Trey Lance hits, he's going to be one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. Now, I know that there's a little boom or bust to him. I understand that there is because, again, he's only a 16-game starter on the FCS level. Like, I get it. But please do not immediately just discount a talent like Trey Lance because he went to the same school as Carson Wentz and Carson Wentz didn't end up working out. That's lazy scouting. Trey Lance is his own individual. And I think from a stylistic perspective, he makes the most sense for what Nick Sirianni and that Frank Reich style of offense wants to do.
And now you mentioned it. You're in Eagles country, but you're not an Eagles fan. You're a Rams fan. So now take it away. With the Rams draft, what do you want to see happen?
I mean, there's a couple easy spots that need to be fixed up. I'm really excited, first and foremost. I respected Jared Goff for what he did, but Matt Stafford is a huge upgrade. I'm really excited to see what he does in that offense. For me, it's you might lose Austin Blythe at center. It's a good center draft, whether that is Quinn Meinerz, who we talked about, whether that is Josh Myers from Ohio State, whether that is Creed Humphrey, whether that is even Landon Dickerson, even though he gets hurt so much. I think the Rams will be heavy in the interior offensive line department this year. And I think that we really need to find your stable center if Austin Blythe is out the door. And then on the defensive side of the ball, for me, the only spots that you really need to really, get depth at least, or maybe a potential starter, is linebacker. I think that Micah Kaiser did some good stuff, but you're really thin at linebacker. You're really thin on the second level. I think it's a great linebacker class, which goes right into the wheelhouse of what the Rams need. And then edge pass rusher, for me, like they re-signed Leonard Floyd, so it's not as big as it could have been. But I still would like to see a guy that's talented that could give you a high volume of reps with a guy like Aaron Donald, because we've seen what Aaron Donald can do with the guy next to him, with the last two guys, right? Dante Fowler Jr., who was at the midst of Bustum, and then has 11.5 sacks. And then Leonard Floyd, same story, and he has 11.5 sacks last year. So I would like to continue to add some players to that outside linebacker edge group, because they run a 3-4 defense. And then what I skipped over again, because I don't think it's as big as need as what center is on the offensive side of the ball. But adding a vertical element to the passing game, I think, is a potential at some point. Like getting a guy somewhere on day 2 or day 3 that has that speed, like Amir Smith-Marset did visit the Rams, or Zoom called with the Rams the other day, and I would love his element in the Rams passing attack. I think that they have some great route runners, some great yak guys in the vein of Robert Woods as a route runner, Cooper Kupp as that guy that can break a ton of tackles after the catch. And Van Jefferson's a good guy on the perimeter that can do a lot of things in the back shoulder game. But adding a guy with a vertical element for me might be the missing piece to this Rams offense.
And now we're going to finish it off with a little bit more quarterback talk. Deshaun Watson and Russell Wilson. Both are rumored to be on the trade market. Now, here's the 2-part question for it. If you were an NFL GM, what would you want in return for either Wilson or Watson? And then the other part, if you're in the quarterback market, are you more likely to draft someone early on, or are you willing to part ways with that early draft pick, leverage the future, and bring in either Watson or a Wilson?
Well, it's funny. 94-1 WIP here in Philly has been talking about this last couple of days, because apparently the Eagles are into the Deshaun Watson sweepstakes from a report. So for me, what are you going to get from Deshaun Watson? I mean, he's a 25-year-old quarterback who might be a top 5 quarterback in the NFL. I think he is anyway. So what are we going to get? I mean, let's start with 3 first-round picks, maybe. I think that's not an unreasonable thing to think, like 3 first-round picks next 3 years, or if you have multiple first-round picks in a year. And then after that, I think another day 2 selection, and then maybe a player as well, maybe a solid football player. I think that there is at least 3 firsts somewhere on day 2, and then a football player. It's got to be the asking price for Deshaun Watson. Russell Wilson, I think, is also a top 5 quarterback in the NFL and is a great quarterback, future Hall of Famer, but he is going to be 32 years old, so he's a little younger. So I don't think his asking price is going to be quite as high. I would say maybe 2 firsts, 2 seconds, and maybe another day 3 selection. Like, I don't think the first round picks is going to be quite as heavy for a guy like Russ. Would I rather draft a guy in the top 10 or draft them is a completely different conversation. I'd rather have Deshaun Watson, even if I'm depleting my drafts for the next couple of years. For me, I mean, he's a slam dunk, right? Like, I have him locked up. I know he's going to, hurt your cap a little bit in some respects, but like, are you going to draft a guy that's going to be a top 5 quarterback for the next 3 or 4 years in the first rounds? Like, maybe he'll be that in 3 or 4 years from now, but immediately you get that guy that's already there. Russell Wilson's a little more of a question mark in a conversation just because of his age again. I do think that I'd be willing to take the risk if I was a team maybe trading up into the top 10. If I was a top 10 team, though, that, is in the process of rebuilding, Russell Wilson for me is kind of like at 32 years old, he's even though I'm sure he's going to play another like 6+ years. So it's not like this is like, 2 years, then he's done, like a Brady situation. I still think that you have to be a team that's more on the cusp of potentially being a contender, right? So like if a New England Patriots outside of the top 10 wanted to make a move for a guy like Russell Wilson, or a team like that, or a San Francisco 49ers, or maybe even a Chicago Bears, which I think are a quarterback away from being at least a good football team. Those are the kind of teams that I think are more than likely in that conversation. I don't think that a top 10 team is going to take that gamble, just because I don't think that the windows of success necessarily mesh up as well with Russell Wilson.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's Ryan Roberts at Rise and Draft on Twitter. Make sure you follow him for all his latest takes. He is the NFL Draft Analyst for NFL Draft Bible, which is the official draft coverage provider for Sports Illustrated. Ryan, thank you.
Thank you, Craig. I appreciate it.
Hey everybody, Craig Forstall. Thanks for tuning in and listening to another episode of That Sports Guys podcast. Make sure to follow me on Twitter at @that_sports_guy to catch all the latest updates and podcast episodes. Until next time, stay safe and be easy.